Hello and welcome to the final video of my Sinnoh League environment. This is just a general look at it before we actually go into the game renderer. If you're not familiar with the game, it's based off of the Gen 4 League from Pokemon. I took heavy reference from both the 2D versions and 3D versions of the game. These are all the reference photos I came within initially. Additionally, I own Brilliant Diamond as well as the 2D games, but Brilliant Diamond was the only game I used as any reference where I'd actually walk around the game, see different areas. And we will go more in depth on the individual assets within this, as well as the assets that I made this week. So we go into play. We have a flying camera that is automatically set at a certain angle. If it's ever off at the wrong angle, you just simply press T, and we can kind of start with a simple going up and kind of just looking around. This is the top area. We go down. You can see the water is moving. The waterfall is moving. Very recently, I changed up the saturation on both the water and waterfall as been recommended by me. I did so by just adding a little bit of a painter effect to the main water and increasing its saturation while decreasing the saturation on the waterfall, which from the base image I had for the waterfall, I had already added some noise as well as just general correction. We come down here, we got some nice stuff. The path is technically a new asset. The path was added through a decal, which I had to go back and forth constantly between Photoshop and this to make my edits. The biggest new things are the Torteras. They're kind of just chilling here. The textures are pretty solid for what their purposes are. They're not really meant to be seen up close, so a lot of the normals are a bit jagged, as most of the lines on them are made by normals, especially along the green undershell, I should say. Any line that goes, if I press escape, if I point out this, these, those kind of lines are all just made through normal stamps, including the jaw, which may or may not be a mistake, and I would like to go back at some point and still correct that to make the jaw actually part of the model. The leaves are not rendering as well as obviously the other leaves because these leaves are a much higher poly count, whereas this one is part of a 4096 overall. I could likely increase the overall distance that this leaf area has so it can be more covered like these are. If I come over here to one of the Pokeball statues, I have to keep reminding myself that we are viewing all the assets and not just a couple. Not just the ones that I made this week. So this week I made the Torterra and I made the Path decal, and that was about it. I additionally tried to get in some animations, like this one would be going down, kind of leaning forward, drinking some water every once in a while. Jesus, that is a tall waterfall, which is game accurate. I counted the number of layers individually and made that to be correct. I additionally brought around a rectangle, usually that would be equivalent to the height of a character, and use that to kind of get around. You also have some cave areas over here. There are some areas where the textures in particular have a really bad line to them, but it's because you're meant to be seeing them at a certain angle. This is kind of just a closer look at the bark. Ooh, if we get down, we can see the different flowers. You can also see some of the other plants we have. We have our little 2D flat image of grass, which is just alpha texture. All the other plants in the scenes, besides the two different types of grass, are these actually modeled things. We have our snapdragons, and a couple of other kind of flowers, one of which is a marigold, and the other one had a really long Cali something name, but I often just abbreviated it to Cali. Maybe here we can see a better look at the two different kinds of grass. Grass 1, grass 2. You can also see the different kind of textures that are made along the map. If I press T, brings us back here. You can see that this kind of earth texture has its segmentation, but there's a different texture made for the top parts of it, just so it doesn't have that segmentation going on. We also have our little cave area down here. Just a simple, basic kind of just blackout texture. I don't think it's black exactly, but it serves its purpose as that's really is just kind of a vortex when it's actually in the real Pokemon game. If we come up here, we have the actual league building, which is inherently the centerpiece. I would honestly think that this place has two centerpieces. The bottom layer has its torteras, whereas up here it has this beautiful building that has just so many different textures on it, which is slightly my own fault for not optimizing, but I think it actually worked out in its benefit. You can see the different details added in the windows. Go up here, we can see these different glass sections. See the kind of, like I just say, corn on the cob texture that goes on these, but that is accurate to the game. A lot of normal stamps everywhere. In fact, the entire brick facade, as well as these tiles, are just purely made through normal stamps, which definitely saves on polygon count, if nothing else. You additionally have some fences. You can also see these areas where initially there would technically be some windows, but based off line of sight in the game, you would just never see those. These are also windows, though given the time of day, the amount of reflection you get is not really showing those off. You have these different areas that are actually fully built in the scene, the little dangly parts for the castle. You also have these wonderful railings that have a wood texture underneath the base color just to give them the normal lamps, the normal, just the normal map part of it. This door has actually a pretty decently complex thing going on, though it is just the cable from Painter. You just have these nice stylized segments, which I think I individually put the baselines, though I could be incorrect, as in I used a normal map stamp to create these lines. These windows I also created alongside the window seals. I unfortunately never found time to create the window seals around the rest of them, though that is something I could do, though that would also inherently increase the polygon count of this scene even more drastically. So if I were to go back and make the window seals, I would likely just make a single window seal as a bent version and then just add them to each part and not model them into the castle like these ones are currently, as are these ones. Trying to think of anything else we haven't really seen particularly. I could mention that there are wet wood versions and dry wood versions. Just a little bit of a variation in the textures. Once again, just kind of re-highlight the Torteras. Since you never see underneath them, there is a bit of an underneath texture as well. Should probably just have press T. But this is the overall scene. This is the exact angle you would normally see it at. You can see all the water moving. So I was able to figure out how to get the textures to be animated, but not the characters. So I wanted the characters at least moving around a little bit. Probably nothing too drastic so it doesn't take away from the scene. And honestly, I am perfectly fine with how things turned out. You have just an abundance of flowers over in this area. You can also kind of see there's this nice little underflower texture to the grass that if you're not looking closely enough, you probably wouldn't see otherwise. Yes, overall, this is what the environment I have created looks like. I've been creating this for the past 7.5 weeks, or technically 6 if you don't include the documentation, as all the references were easy to find, as this is just based off an already existing environment. The goal was just to create a slightly more realistic version of the Sinnoh League in Gen 4, as Gen 4 is my favorite Pokemon generation. Additionally, Torterra is my favorite Pokemon because Torterra was my very first Pokemon. And I even had some fun with that when I was making the textures because I simply called the texture on him Leafy, which is the name I gave my Torterra way back in the day. Come over here, we can look at Torterra. You'll see that he only has one material on him, which is something I find lovely. So you don't have to worry about all that shenanigans. Nice little kind of bone texture stuff going on. We'll probably bounce back and forth between the scene, but as you can see, that is Torterra. We can go ahead and already go look at him in Maya. So I have some reference images. I additionally have one more reference image, but I kind of kept turning that on and off. But there he is, Torterra. Overall, pretty simple. I mean, he is decently high in poly count. Not extremely, though. He's only up to 28,000. So you can see where there's more and more polygons. You can also see because He's actually the assemblation of multiple parts. Pretty much every single part of him is a different part. The eyes are a different part, nose is a different part, horns are a different part, trees a different part, leaves are a different part, spikes are a different part, arms are a different part, like I said, technically legs, and each individual toenail is a different part, though often they are just made from the single same toenail, which was then duplicated and brought around. I made the slightly bad choice of using a lot of booleans when I was doing this, which led me to a lot of cleanup issues, but I am overall very happy with how this turned out. As, like I said before, this is my absolute favorite Pokemon, and he was initially meant to have a little bit of an animation, just a simple, oh boy, here we go. Yeah, just a little lean forward. And then for the life of me, no matter how much I tried, I was not able to get that attached to the character within the thing, even though I was able to bring in the animation and I could tell that the animation was leaning towards the correct area. I added the animation to the creature. I thought maybe it was working at first, but I think it was just my mind tricking me. The important thing is that it wasn't working. And you can see a bit where there's some malformations now in the texture, namely the face. The face I am not the biggest fan of, just because I believe I should go back and actually create the jawline, the actual underjaw, which is pretty massive on Torterra, as its actual own texture. Not texture, but its own geometry. But overall, there is a ton of normal map stamps. Just an absolute ton. You can kind of see why the layering of stuff is important, though, because, oh boy, when you don't, because this tree really only has that going for it. It is actually the same exact wood that I have from my previous trees. I just made that a smart texture and I applied it to this tree, which made it pretty simple of a process. But that is that. We go on to normals. Yeah, yeah. The normals are pretty important to Torterra because I saw all the line work that is existing on Torterra, and I was like, I can create most of that through normal stamps, which was a pain because I kind of just I need to figure out a better way to actually just draw with normals. Like I need to just find out why and how I can do that better. And then I'll have a much more lovely time than the ways I did this. Eye colors was just boom, fairly simple. You can see there's a bunch of masking that's happening. And then I just had often when I was in here, I just had symmetry on, which not entirely sure which one of these is symmetry, but oh boy, we did something. I think maybe it's this. I don't know. Anywho, so yeah, eyes and nose. It's just kind of that underdark black that exists. If I just take that off, you can definitely see where this is at. I should have gone back and added a normal stamp for the nostrils. I just think that that slipped my mind at the time, which is not very visible in the game, but I should come back and do that as well. I honestly didn't even remember that until now. I had my other complaints about this, but that was not one that I still had in mind. This green skin is simply the green part of the skin underneath the shell. This environment, ooh, we're talking about my actual real life desk right now where I'm at. Not exactly the best location to use a mouse. Skin brown is actually just what's underneath, so if I take off green skin, you can see there's a bit of an issue. Though I think it's because I just added, it's the way I have my layers. And I know there's something underneath that probably is putting green on a ton of stuff, and then it's probably the green that maybe is working with this. Which is honestly why layering is so good because I now realize there's maybe technically some issues, but due to the fact that I have everything layered in the way I do, it's not actually that big of an issue. Oh boy, leaves. If I open this folder, we A, have a green fill. Okay, let me just go one at a time. So, green fill. Bop, beep, boop. The way I did this was I basically had three circles. I cut off the bottom, and then I used the randomize function within Maya, which is called transform, and I just basically had all of the vertexes highlighted. I tried going back and making edits to the tree in a similar fashion, and it just wasn't looking good. Might be it's because I also have that tree in like two layers for its leaves, so there's probably better ways for me to go about it. And then we have green shell, which first off, bop, you can take that off at any point. I probably should come back still and just add the green more to some of the spikes because there's supposed to be a little bit of the green kind of climbing up the spikes. But as you can see, that's pretty simple. Just two little section, bop, and then beep, which this one has a nice little noise going for it. A lot more of the things that have. Oh yeah, this you can definitely see the line of symmetry now. You can just really just see kind of where I grabbed my various things at. Color selections. A lot of color selections maps in general were the main way I had to handle things. But yeah, I could probably talk about Totera more just because I love him so much, and there's so many other cool things like this no map stamp that I also have underneath. Just bop. Once again, the normals are very crucial in this one. And then if I go back over to my files, I can go over to week 7, Totera references. These are all the images I had for reference. These are the image planes I made. Totera texture, pretty simple. Just kind of this is what's going on with it. That's honestly very fun to look at. Path texture. Once again, very simple. I kind of went back and forth between using the two of these, and this is the decal, though I made quite a few edits to it, and I don't know if I saved it out just here or just within Unity, because I was probably just saving it directly to Unity so I could edit as I went. Now, at this point, we can actually kind of start talking about every other thing that exists in this scene. So, I guess since we zoomed out, this whole terrain, the majority of this terrain is a single object. Obviously, all the other additional things on it are not, but everything, including these cavern areas and the cave entrance, these little uphills down here, these different sections going down, that's all just one object that I purposely made and edited my way through. I made it simply as a white box initially, and then I came through, made all my edits, added all these different sections where the textures were going to be different and repeating, which is why I had to make the path texture as a decal later on, just because it wasn't part of the actual scene or wouldn't fit because of the amount of repeating that was happening everywhere. If we go over to one of the Pokeball statues, this is probably not the best one to go to. Let's try going to this one instead. There is text on it, which is just basically saying on the way to the League of upcoming Pokemon League, the pinnacle of Trainerdom. Something along those lines. It is word for word pulled from Pokemon, and I found a Pokemon font to use. You can see there's some moss growing on it. This one has a lot of different plant life growing around it, though I believe these ones are actually more mossy than the ones that are up here, due to the fact that they would have more water coming on them, as I do have various versions where one was no moss, minimal moss, a lot of moss, and the most moss. And those were kind of scattered out through different areas. Since we're up here, we might as well look at the trees. We have these beautiful ones, though we've kind of already talked quite a bit about how the trees work, though these things in particular is 2 layers each, 2 layers each, 2 layers each, just so they can kind of fill out each other because the way I had my texture made, it wasn't quite spreading to the very ends. So it kind of needed to have two different layers that are slightly offset from each other just to fill in the blanks. And they're, of course, rotated along the x-axis to fill in those blanks. Otherwise, the bark, there is a dry version of the bark. Okay, Unity. Yeet. And a wet version, which is what the ones that are right by the water have. Nice, more wet tree. But also, since we're down here, we might as well look at the flowers. Which these ones are all the same thing. They just have 3 different textures. We have Cali blue, Cali orange, and Cali pink. And they have these tiny little stems going down from them. Now, if we go to Snapdragon, This one is probably the one that has the most polygons of the little plants. It's very nice, very simple. I did a lot of little things in Painter with them, but they're very cool. And then we have the marigolds, or the buttercups, actually. Oh, that's right. I do name them appropriate. So these are the buttercups. You have these little stems on the inside and these much longer stems going down. While we're down here, you can see the grass texture has all these little flowers in them, all these different discolorations due to various alpha masks. That might not be the right term, but various masks upon the textures, where I layered darker greens and lighter greens. We've already talked about the textures along this, the earthy textures with cracks, the segmented cracked ones, which are different textures because I needed them to be to not have the segments going across the top. Now we can talk about the water, which is split into a couple different areas. We have this one, which is nice little simple area. You can see the scroll movement over here. It's at a 0.1 and only in the Y value. We have this. Oofta. Something happened. Yeah, so we have this one, which is a plane, and it's actually like split right down the middle. So the texture moves only in one direction. As you can see, it's only scrolling in X. But due to the fact that the texture is cut in half, well, I guess not texture, the model is cut in half and then flipped along the X, and they're cut perfectly over each other. It makes the texture just split along the middle and go across. Next, we have the actual waterfall, which is just long piece of curved geometry, and then it has its own waterfall texture, which is really fast. It's put at a 1 value and it's sent to go down. This one, yeah, I did not create these planes inside of Maya. I created these ones actually inside of Unity, and I just had them mirror each other. And they have a different texture going for them. For the wave effect, though, it was just the other one duplicated and flipped over each other. But I still went back to Photoshop and made that appropriately. And then, of course, the top water is just the same as the bottom. Still that 0.1 value. But since we're talking about water, we can talk about the whole ocean, which is pretty big. Pretty big. So I will just actually try to click on something else instead. So we can get back into a scene view that makes more sense. But the ocean itself, pretty simple, just giant plane made in here. The material is water ocean. And then it has this big old thing for a 0.05 on the speed. Ooh, okay, there's one more thing at the bottom we still need to talk about. Boom! Road sign. Basically Pokemon League ahead, which honestly is actually pretty legible if you really think about it. Pokemon League ahead. Legible. And then Pokemon League behind because I was like, well, I'm not gonna. I was gonna make. I could have just cut this thing in half and not had it back to it, but it was so few polygons to begin with. I was like, yep. Pokemon League behind. Once again, I'm realizing how legible this language actually is. So that's wonderful. But yes, that is a text that I just found online, which works for me perfectly. And then we go over here. I probably just need to measure the DPI of my mouse so it's not doing its funky things. This is the monster, where it has 24 textures. Oh my gosh. This thing was a pain. But it was also the first thing I exported out of Painter that actually was using the proper Unity export settings. So that part is very cool because it actually led me down the correct road of how I'm supposed to be doing things in here. And we've already gone very in depth about it, very in depth. So just to kind of recap on some other things, what we were supposed to do today is Totera model, Totera texture, Totera animated, Totera coding, and then I added path decal last minute just because I realized I needed that, and I did that pretty early on in the week. Additionally, the total hours that were estimated was 79. And then if we go to the actual hours, the grand total is 84 with an estimated of 79. So we only went over by approximately 4.4, give or take however long I've been recording, which seems to be about 30 minutes, and then the upload time and all that kind of stuff, which whether I count that to the grand total or not is up to me. But press play one more time. You can see this nice, wonderful scene. You just go up. Oh, it's so close, you're just accidentally cutting out through it. Boom. Wonderful. Just kind of go back in so the corners aren't showing. Wonderful, wonderful. Look how beautiful this scene is. Oh my goodness. I freaking love it. Freaking love it. Oh, so nice. So nice. I'm honestly very proud of this. I've had times with this environment where I was like, oh, I'm just not feeling it. It's not looking as good. But I think once all the pieces came together, it honestly is such a nice, perfect environment. I think the water change that was recommended to me was honestly very useful, making it more unrealistic on the water because it was oddly hyper realistic. Really did make a change to this scene. The only thing I can see myself going back and changing is the Torterras, especially, though they're honestly perfectly fine for the sake of this environment. It might just be for my own sake of me wanting a better Torterra model since Torterra is my favorite Pokemon. But that will end us for this. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it all the way through, bravo! And I hope you enjoyed the environment I spent the last 7.5 weeks working on.